Episode 1 of 9 Perfect Strangers begins with a series of different people heading to a retreat called Tranquillum, deep in the heart of Cabrillo, California. These guys and gals are spending 10 days there trying to fix up their lives through some much needed R&R. There's a litany of different problems these people are dealing with, and in episode 1 we only really taste a fraction of that. Frances is stressed about her book deal, Napoleon and Heather have relationship problems which are a little better disguised than the Gen Z couple of Jessica and Ben. Their big drama comes from needing to hand over their phones, which seems like the end of the world for Jessica. There's also Tony, who winds up most of the fault for the retreat, while Lars is a little more restrained and skeptical. In fact, he reads through his contract and has a lot of questions regarding blood taking and the lack of advertising for the resort. It turns out Lars has his own secrets, smuggling a phone out in the woods, which Zoe just so happens to see while out wandering alone. With so many characters to play with, the one who's sort of overshadowed here is Carmel, who's allegedly there for weight loss, but we'll circle back to that one later. With the wellness program beginning, Warden Masha arrives to meet everyone individually. First up is Frances, who's clearly carrying around a lot of demons. She sits on the bed and starts sobbing, but abruptly stops when Masha shows and gives her some words of encouragement. She watches everyone on a series of monitors too, acting incredibly creepy. Given the no phone rule, all of our players make their various final calls to reveal they're going off the grid. Just as they do, rumours are abound as to what Masha's purpose is and what they need to do. Masha eventually brings them all together and promises to help all 9 of our strangers, or I guess 9 perfect strangers, to leave Tranquillum as better people. However, none of them are particularly pleased with Masha taking things from their bags, including wine and chocolate. Masha, as we soon find out, is actually from Russia. She was apparently shot dead in a parking garage, but was revived by Yao, one of the workers at Tranquillum. Masha wants to bring the same cathartic release for everyone else to allow them to die, metaphorically I hope, and become better people. And how will Masha do that? Well, as she tells Heather, she intends to, and I quote, fuck with them, which is where episode 1 comes to an end. Episode 2 of 9 Perfect Strangers begins with Frances heading off to catch up with Zoe, who ran out of the session last episode. It turns out the family are dealing with a big loss in the form of their son Zach. He died 3 years back, and it soon becomes clear that this is a black cloud hanging over the family. When Heather shows, Frances does her best to try and help, but the woman simply walks away. Back in a heated therapy room, all the different residents start to turn on Masha. Given she only accepts 10% of applicants, it's clear that these people have been chosen because they're damaged and are there for a different reason. It's here we learn a little more about Tony. He's divorced, a drug addict, and also has 2 kids as well. His relationship is pretty estranged, but Tony believes Masha is using this as a weapon against him. He's clearly not happy with his life and eventually gives in, allowing Tony his vodka and pills back. As he settles back into a destructive state, Masha reminds him she just wants his secret and to make him feel better. Given Jessica is such a fan of Frances's work, the two have a nice chat down by the pool. Frances reminds the girl not to use her novels as love advice, especially given how romanticised and fantastical some books can be. It's clear these two were chosen for a very specific reason, and it seems that their connection with Frances's book may be why. Outside, Masha gets talking to Yao. Apparently, Delilah gets jealous a lot as Masha kisses Yao's legs and tells him they're inexplicably bound together. It's clearly a lot more than meets the eye here, but for now it's being kept under wraps. Anyway, today's big session involves our 9 perfect strangers digging themselves a grave and lying within, reflecting on their life's choices. It's all laid out in a big semicircle as Masha arrives and gets them to control their thoughts. With chimes echoing through the air, she tells them all to step out their graves as new people. In doing so, Frances heads back to the spa for some acupuncture. There, the workers at Tranquillum take blood samples. The one person whom this grave task seems to work for, no pun intended on grave by the way, is Jessica. She heads off for a one-to-one with Masha afterwards, telling her she wants to transform her life. Jessica wants to transcend beyond her simplistic life and actually be someone that matters. Masha sees through this facade though, and claims that a lot of Jessica's drama stems from Ben. She thinks the lover's gone from their relationship, but won't admit it to herself. Tony and Frances end up having some hilarious interactions down at the pool while this is going on. With Frances noisily snoring, Tony throws a grape straight into Frances's mouth. Although she starts choking, Tony jumps in to help the girl out. The pair actually have really good chemistry on screen, with Frances admitting she's still reeling from a past relationship with a guy called Paul. When the conversation turns to Frances's latest book, she learns the critics have given it bad reviews. She's not happy and eventually walks away. Off on the hike, all the gang get involved in their trust exercises. Heather, however, turns away from the group and stands precariously on the edge of the cliff face, looking out at the drop below. Napoleon holds her shoulders, but Delilah warns him off, telling the guy to back off. It's clear Heather has a lot of demons, and although she's talked out of jumping, it's still a pretty alarming moment. On the back of her despair, Frances shows up to see Masha. She's worried that as a novelist, she's a one-trick pony, but Masha turns that metaphor around, telling her she's a car that's run out of gas. When Frances leaves, Masha turns back to her monitors. Interestingly, Tony decides to get back in his grave to find relief, while Zoe and Napoleon hash it out in the woods. With everything bubbling up and the group not fully detoxed yet, Masha makes the decision to start the protocol. What could this mean? Well, I'm sure we'll find out in the next episode, because episode 2 comes to an end here. Episode 3 of 9 Perfect Strangers begins with all our guys and gals waking up after an eventful few days. While Jessica and Ben end up lovemaking, Heather is not in the mood for the same from Napoleon. Speaking of which, Napoleon has a one-on-one session with Masha coming up, and he's surprisingly upbeat about the whole thing. Delilah is concerned about the project as a whole, believing their candidates just aren't ready. Masha brushes that aside though and sets to work getting ready for day 3. This includes a smoothie for breakfast, and while they sit at the table, Lars lives up to his branded nickname I've given him of Spoon, given he keeps stirring up a whole pot of issues with the different residents. First up, he probes the marital issues between Ben and Jessica. Well, Yao has just a ticket to cut out all this tension. There's a potato sack race coming up, and Lars does his best to rile up the group further before this, bringing out Carmel's pent-up rage following a particularly crude suggestion. Speaking of which, Tony clearly has rage and grief built up himself too, and his drug addiction is certainly not doing him any favours. Flashes to the past reveal troubling revelations here, including a football match where he's taken off on a stretcher. As we come to find out later on, Tony is actually a pretty famous player, but no longer going under his alias of Smiley. It's a pretty ironic nickname in truth, given what we know about him so far. After the sack race finishes, Napoleon shows up to see Masha during his one-on-one. Here we learn Zach took his own life, and that has obviously affected Heather very badly. Napoleon, meanwhile, is very standoffish, deciding to look at the facts and not allow himself to feel the pain. Although he remains scientific and detached from the situation, his body language shows something very different. Masha encourages Napoleon to close his eyes here, where he ends up seeing his son. Napoleon lies about it though, and eventually skips away from the session. It's clear he needs to face his grief, but it doesn't seem like the right time to do that. In order to help feel the land, Delilah encourages the girls, who have been kept separate to the guys for this session, to get into the river naked. Only Heather does this though, while the others are way too self-conscious of their bodies to get involved. On the shore though, tensions flare between Carmel and Jessica, especially when the former lashes out at Jess for her Insta profile. Things do eventually simmer down while in the hot spring, there's definitely some poetic irony there, as the girls discuss their sex life. It's very awkward for Zoe, especially when Heather admits it's been 3 years since she and Napoleon made love. It's not the same anymore, and obviously after Jack's passing, it's difficult for her to feel that same level of intimacy with her husband. The guys meanwhile are off with Yao and trying to forage for food. The attention here turns from Tony across to Ben, as Lars probes him over how he makes his money. Apparently he won $22 million in the lottery, but in doing so his whole life was upended and completely changed. Lars though, well, he just continues to lash out and belittle the others. That is, until the guys all rally together and manage to hunt and kill an animal. Given they were supposed to be living off the land, they've certainly done what they set out to do, but for Masha, there's more going on here behind her strange smile when she finds out. Although she congratulates them, she hurries back into her room and begins breathing heavily. Yao shows up to see her though, telling the woman he's sorry for her loss. Day turns to night and all of our strangers start dancing by the fire. Things have definitely changed here though, and Lars can sense this too. He hits out at Delilah, given more things have been taken from his room, but that's soon brushed aside in favour of the big goat banquet. Napoleon stands up to say a few words and eventually opens up, admitting that it's his fault that Zach passed away. If he hadn't snoozed his alarm and gone in to see Zach when he should have, Heather wouldn't have gone through this trauma. It's a cathartic release, one that eventually sees Napoleon face his grief head on, which is exactly what Heather wanted from him all these years. During the moments of silence that follow, Heather turns to Masha and asks if they've all been medicated. That wry smile back confirms that they have, which is where episode 3 comes to an end. Episode 4 of 9 Perfect Strangers begins with a flashback to the past. specifically involving Masha as she heads into the parking lot. She's been followed by a gunman who shoots her. This single gunshot blasts us back to the present as Heather asks once again whether they've all been medicated. Masha admits that she's microdosing them all with magic mushrooms, even Tony too. His oxy has been switched out a while back for mushrooms. Francis is understandably not happy and walks away, while Masha turns and nonchalantly tells the others that they're all keeping secrets. Lars, as it turns out, is actually an investigative journalist, which explains why he's been stirring so much and lashing out, but Masha is well aware of who he is. She's actually happy that he's there and encourages him to continue on with his research. It certainly takes Lars aback when she says this, but Masha continues to flirt the line of insanity. This whole ordeal obviously isn't helped by the fact Masha is receiving threats, and as she contemplates in private with Yao whether it could be one of the guests, we're also left wondering who this could be. After the events of the evening, all the guests contemplate whether to hang around and continue treatment or not. Francis isn't happy with the lack of consent regarding the psychedelics, but she's deciding to stay all the same. Given Tony's transformation from arsehole to, well, less of an arsehole, she's convinced that this is actually working for them. Masha's one-on-one with Carmel though brings up more revelations about our quiet guest. Behind the girl's shy facade is a much darker core. She's a bit of a live wire, and her earlier utterance about wanting to punch Jessica in the face is a bit alarming. Some of this seems to stem from her marriage, with physical abuse defining a lot of her moments in the past. In fact, Carmel has a pretty nasty scar on her chest from where her lover bit her, an act of love as Carmel calls it. Knowing this is just an excuse, Masha has Carmel write down all the nasty things her partner has said about her. Meanwhile, we see a few little bits of history about Lars here as well. He's going through a breakup with Ray, and his devout Christian upbringing means he's handling a lot of pressure. He talks to Zoe about this too, who is also in denial regarding her depression with Zach's death. The day's task though revolves around anger, and after Francis makes her feelings felt, Carmel is encouraged to let hers out as well. With a dummy set up, Masha reads out all those horrible things Carmel's partner said about her. Carmel completely unleashes her anger, smashing the dummy repeatedly. The others watching this though are pretty scared, including Napoleon and Tony. When Tony skips out of this session, Francis follows and tries to get through to him, but he's clearly erratic and suffering quite badly. It turns out Tony had a fight at a bar in the past, and this resulted in a man being taken to hospital with a bleed to the brain. This same guy then died 6 days later. This is a big drama surrounding Tony and his metaphorical black cloud hanging over his life. He's got nowhere else to go, and this dummy beatdown is precisely why he's acting in this way. As they turn to night, Delilah confronts Masha, but she waves away her protests. However, that's the wrong move because things take a turn for the worst when Masha heads into her apartment later that evening. A smashed plate on the ground and a note up on the wall reading, "It's good to die," hinting that someone at the resort has it in for her. Who could it be? Episode 5 of 9 Perfect Strangers begins with flashes in the past. Masha actually lost one of her residents at Tranquillium, and shots of CPR, flatlining heart monitors, and blinding images confirm as much. While Masha suffers with ghosts of her past, so too does Zoe it seems, who dreams of Zach being for her. It turns out she and Zach were close and she misses her brother dearly. Zoe admits she feels incredibly lonely now that he's gone, and there's a big hole in her life. In the morning, Napoleon rocks up in the room, given it's Zoe's party, and starts dancing about in his underwear, as you do. There's a lot more laughter with his family, but whether it's all actually a facade or not remains to be seen. Anyway, the gang join together and discuss dreams. Specifically, Napoleon discusses how he dreamt of being one of the Beatles. Carmel, however, is triggered by a song being hummed, leading her to plunge a fork straight into the table. Speaking of dreams, Lars confirms that he dreamt of giving birth while all the other residents are there to see it happen. He can still see the dream vividly, while Tony happens to be the father, crying uncontrollably. Francis has a visitor, and it's Paul, and he's there to say sorry. Now, all of this is actually one big dream sequence after she collapses in her oatmeal and passes out. However, it confirms what her big drama actually is, and it seems like Paul is a scam artist and a reflection of her own insecurities regarding writing. Of course, the one person here who shares the most with Francis is Tony. He sits with her and encourages the girl to keep writing. During this tender moment, Francis suddenly needs to vomit and hurries off. Meanwhile, Masha invites Delilah out into the open, where she apologizes to the latter for what happened with Connolly, the one who died in the past. Delilah is being dosed up it seems, and Masha encourages her to stay with her while they build something great. And just like that, Delilah suddenly leans forward and kisses Masha. Well, that was unexpected. It doesn't take long for a weird montage to pick up though, as Delilah and Yao share some intimate moments together, and while they do, Masha receives another threatening message. Anyway, the day's event goes ahead all the same with a cliff dive. Napoleon wastes absolutely no time jumping straight in the water down below, but Heather is far more reserved about this. Well, the second time, he laps with her while holding hands. The shot of adrenaline is just what the pair need, finally making new memories together. While this is going on, Lars heads out to his secret spot, phoning his contact and letting them know that he's being dosed. Benjamin and Jessica head off together as well, where the latter admits she really hates all the money he has. As they talk about their old life together, the pair reflect on their best moments and how much they miss it. Well, while the pair make love in the hot spring, Carmel ends up seeing them together and becomes erratic. As she hurries off, it's clear that this reminds her of her past with her boyfriend. On the way off, she runs into Lars. It turns out Carmel has had to pent up all of her anger and despair, putting on a brave face for the kids. Given her abusive partner, Lars encourages Carmel to embrace disassociation. The easiest way of doing that is to find someone who sees her for who she truly is. As they hug it out, they realise that the drugs have certainly had an effect on them both. That night, the gang all join together to celebrate Zoe's birthday. The celebrations involve Napoleon singing, and while he does, Zoe notices Zach standing by the pool. As she stares off in his direction, Masha notices and perks up. She hurries over to her and whispers in Zoe's ear, telling the girl that she's the key to what's happening. But how? What does this mean? I guess we'll find out as episode 5 comes to an end. Episode 6 of 9 Perfect Strangers begins with Francis continuing to be haunted by ghosts from the past, specifically that of Paul, as he appears as a teeny tiny man running across the apartment. Through his biting rants, Paul reveals that she actually gave him $128,000. Speaking of the past, Lars too suffers from ghosts of his past. Remember when we mentioned that he had the Christian upbringing? Well, all the kids gather around him, bullying the guy and chanting that he's a fat. When Lars suddenly awakens, Masha happens to be there. She hands over a notebook and tells him to record everything that happens this coming day. In the morning, the gang all join together and discuss the nature of dreams. Well, it seems like Masha is controlling their visions and dreams, which seem to be a manifestation of their own insecurities and issues. With treatment seemingly working, the gang all agree to follow through and take more drugs in the morning. With the buddy system in place, Carmel is not so sure how this will react with her current medication. Masha, however, has news for her. Given the death threat she's been dealing with, the big revelation that Masha was having an affair with Carmel's husband is a huge shock to the girl. It also gives Carmel incentive to exact revenge as well. It turns out Carmel has arrived at Tranquillium to study Masha and take inspiration to become a better person and partner. Masha is desperate for Carmel to get all the hatred out of her heart and admits that her husband meant nothing to her. With this secret out in the open, all our gang take their drugs and prepare for the next stage. Delilah is worried though, concerned about pushing the protocol too soon. It also seems like Masha is giving in to temptation, eating cake that previous evening, and brushing aside the fact that there's a big lawsuit hanging over Tranquillum. The drugs kick in and this leads to Tony and Francis kissing outside. This has been brewing for a while, but to see it finally play out is very satisfying. It's eventually broken up by Tony admitting that he's thought about ending everything and committing suicide in the past. From that spot to this hopeful bliss is quite a big journey, and one that Francis listens intently to. Carmel opens up to Lars and admits why she's really at Tranquillum. The odd ones out here are Ben and Jessica, who really don't have a lot of substance or anything to do in this series, to be honest. Jessica's trauma for the episode comes from losing her nose in a vision. Meanwhile, Napoleon, Heather and Zoe all enjoy getting high. Zoe wanders off on her own, where she notices someone walking through the trees. Heather and Napoleon follow, where the trio end up seeing Zach. Things take a turn for the worse though, when Zach mentions to Heather about the medication he was on, specifically how part of these drugs seem to initiate suicidal tendencies. If that wasn't enough, Heather even underlined this part too. When this crippling revelation comes to light, Heather begins screaming and is brought in to be treated. When Masha finds out they all saw Zach, she contemplates just what this means in the grand scheme of things. For now, she checks up on Napoleon, who admits he's struggling to forgive Heather after the big revelation earlier on. As they talk, Masha agrees to help bring their son back. Delilah overhears this and worries about what it could mean, and speaking to Yao, it seems like this incident is what led to the tragedy befalling Connolly, although quite what this protocol we've been hearing about remains a mystery. One thing's for sure though, Delilah wants to leave and get out while they still can. As we flash over to Masha one more time, we see that she had a daughter in the past and she was struck by a car, which is where episode 6 comes to an end. Episode 7 of 9 Perfect Strangers begins with Masha reflecting back on the painful memories from her past. With her daughter riding a bike, she's struck down by a speeding car, sending Masha into a deep spiral of grief. Carmel snaps Masha back to reality though with a stiff punch across the face. With blood staining her cheeks, Yao jumps in and manages to strap Carmel down. As they rush her out of the area, Francis begins to freak out. Tony senses this and suggests they just get away from the place together. As he begins spouting out prose from her book, Tony suddenly changes to sport long hair and white robes. Yep, all of this is a big vision as the treatment starts to spiral out of control. Following their run-in with Zach earlier in the season, both Heather and Napoleon entertain the idea of being with him, even if the whole thing is a hallucinatory lie. Napoleon is still torn over the big reveal with Heather though, which, if you may remember, included her lying about the pill bottle and the side effects therein. Lars trails off from the group and takes Masha aside. It turns out the guest who died was a guy called Aaron Connolly. He died on the premises too, explaining the visions of Masha and Delilah giving CPR to the kid. Masha though chalks it up to a heart attack and nonchalantly brushes aside Lars's concerns. However, it turns out Lars is actually on the island to get to the bottom of this and investigate Connolly's death. His mother is the one who hired him to get involved in this project. As things start to unravel, Masha pushes the Marconi family to increase the odds with their encounter with Zach. She promises that they'll see beyond their wildest dreams, pushing them to up their dosage. This whole plan that she has in mind was successful for only one guest previously. Any guesses who that may be? Yep, it's Connolly. Of course, Lars jumps all over this and confronts Masha about why she's doing it. He knows about her history and believes Masha is crossing a line with the family to try and use them to somehow see her own daughter again. Essentially, the guys and gals in this project are just guinea pigs for Masha. Delilah has had enough of this and refuses to see another disaster on the resort. Her attempts to try and get through to Yao fail though, and she eventually packs up her things and leaves alone, or at least tries to anyway. The gates are locked and the place is on lockdown. Well, it doesn't stop her from driving through a fence and leaving anyway, much to Masha's horror. With less manpower now, Frances wanders off on her own, sitting on the cliff edge and looking out at the water. When Masha catches wind of this, she postpones her plans with the Marconis to make sure she's okay. Interestingly, it's this conversation that allows us to learn more about Masha and what drives her. Since the death of her daughter Tatiana, she's been struggling to feel happy and leading an unfulfilling life. With nothing going to plan, Masha doses the family anyway, and tasks Yao with bringing them to the forest, given that's where they've been seeing Zach the most. Meanwhile, Masha visits Carmel, who's having second thoughts and wants to leave the facility now. Masha tries to convince her otherwise, but as Carmel turns and looks at her, she sports two different coloured eyes. More visions of Masha's past hint that a gunman who shot her in the parking lot had the exact same condition, which is where episode 7 comes to an end. Episode 8 of 9 Perfect Strangers begins its finale with Masha shocked over Carmel's transformation. Sporting a glossy eye, Carmel admits that she's responsible for the text messages and the threats. Carmel came to the facility to try and help her, but Masha has failed to do so, at least so far anyway. Masha forgives her for what she's done, while the girl struggles to forgive herself. As a promise, Masha asks her to allow 9 to 14 hours, in which time she promises to try and cure her. This comes in the form of locking her away in a sensory depravity tank. There's warm water half full, and with the tank both light and soundproof, anyone with claustrophobia is sure to absolutely love this, and Carmel is one of those people. She inevitably begins to panic and struggles to stay calm, and this whole experiment though seems to be a way of allowing her to connect to the past, which Carmel eventually begins to do, seeing flashes of the past. Masha continues to flirt the line of insanity here, and when she reaches a Marconi family outside, she unravels. Lars has told them all about Masha's daughter and what she plans to do, including how she's using them as test pilots for her own journey. As Napoleon and Heather question Masha, she admits that she's consumed by grief and loss. With Masha stuck just as much as the Marconi family are, she decides that they should all meditate and go on this journey together. Lars films the whole affair while the gang hold hands. Blood oozes out of Napoleon's nose as the family gather together and begin chuckling incredulously. Zach shows up before them just like before, seeing all three question him over why he commits suicide. Zach admits there's no rational reason why this happened, and according to him it's just something that happened and there's no explanation. Napoleon continues to hear his alarm clock ringing here, which he interprets as a game over of sorts. Despite being named an exemplary teacher, he's consumed by guilt and grief, believing he's failed Zach as a parent. Zach though interprets that sound as Napoleon needing to stop mourning his suicide. As Zoe and Heather approach too, the gang hug it out and believe they've come to an understanding together. Zach tells them they need to separate the day from him and try to move past the grief threatening to swallow them whole. Meanwhile, Frances approaches Tony while he's in the pool and apologises for her actions. She admits that she tends to babble when she's nervous, and that is most certainly the case regarding their time in the sauna. Tony forgives her though and decides they should leave the facility together, head off to a Four Seasons and go for dinner. As they pack up and get ready to leave, they quiz one of the workers about Carmel and her treatment. Believing her to be okay, the duo head down to the garage. Only all the cars have gone. Jessica and Ben are there too. Remember them? Yeah, they just disappeared these past few episodes, haven't they? And they too are shocked to find the place stripped bare. Heading back inside, they run into Lars once again. He reveals what Masha and the Marconi family are up to, divulging their whole plan. With most of the big players out in the woods, the rest of the patients confront Masha about locking up Carmel. Unfortunately, all the other characters are guided towards Carmel's room and locked in themselves. If that wasn't enough, the room begins to heat up and some of them can smell fire. It seems like the facility is about to go up in flames. Inside this stuffy room, Lars opens up and admits he was in love once. He gave up that opportunity though, and since then he has been ruining his opportunity. This helps to open up the floodgates for the others to reveal their own problems and insecurities too, including how they're going to try and change it going forward. It's Yao though who eventually opens the doors and lets them out, admitting that they simulate the smell of fire to provide a visceral near-death experience. This close to death, it allows people to open up and break down barriers. None of them are particularly happy about this though, and after cursing him out, they walk away. Masha's flashes soon manifests into snowflakes falling in the bright sunshine. There's no clouds though, so this is definitely a vision. And Zoe can see it too, and she guides Masha to try and let go of the pain. As the snow subsides, she sees her daughter standing, silently waiting for her. The two embrace just like they did that fateful night of her death. Having called the police, Delilah shows up with several police cars ready to arrest her. As the other patients gather, they watch as Masha is taken away for questioning. However, she's managed to find peace of herself in the process and smiles at each of them warmly. With the Tranquillum situation behind them, the gang all head back to their daily lives, but things have changed. Yao is off doing charity work with Delilah after apologising to her back at the facility. Lars finally embraces family life with Tom and their baby. As the camera pans across though, his article is the front cover of the New Yorker, labelled Psychedelics to the Rescue. This seems to confirm that Masha is not being put away for an extended period of time. Elsewhere, Frances and Tony go for dinner together. While Frances feels inspired to write, Tony decides to FaceTime his daughter. Carmel finally forgives herself too, and decides to project that knowledge back across to other victims of abuse as well. So what of Ben and Jessica? Well, they've decided to take over Tranquillum in Masha's stead. I guess they need something to do, given they've been pretty pointless characters across the runtime. The Marconi family have now managed to patch up their differences, driving back home, but able to finally move past the situation with Zach and what it's done to their family. So what of Masha? Well, she's free and still seeing visions of her daughter in her life. Everyone is now ready to move on with their lives, safe in the knowledge that they've managed to exorcise their demons. At least until season 2 anyway, where I'm sure more of this story will be unravelled. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.